This is casual wear Cammy, which is sculpted by Daniel Mo and Joao Francisco and is available from CA 3D Studios. My name is your dad and I use 3D printers to create loads of different things, but on this occasion it's a model in the shape of Cammy in casual streetwear. Now that all of that cleaning and model prep and all the things have been done, I can put a primer on this model and I'm going to spray it in my very dirty airbrush booth using Kaleido Primer. Now a primer is something you put down before you put the paints on top of the model. And I realized that you're putting a paint down as a primer, but in theory a primer is supposed to stick better to the surface of the model you're painting over, for example, just normal paints, like the acrylic paints that we use. I do personally find, though, that resin in particular is quite porous and does tend to hold on to most paints, and so in some circumstances you may not have to use a primer. If you can't afford one, just paint the models, but also don't take that word, because maybe it doesn't stick for you, in which case, if it doesn't, I'm not responsible for that mistake. Now, moving swiftly on, the next steps I will do is a zenithal highlight. That is a lighter primer over the top of the darker primer. It also doesn't have to be primer, it could just be an ink. After that, I'm going to then spray my base colors on most of the parts, like for example the jaquette, which by putting the zenithal on, when I put a contrast paint, which is a thinner, more see-through type of paint, it will show off some of those shadows that are left behind by the black, and then I can reinforce that shadow by adding a darker green over the top of it in order to tint those shadows. Now moving on to the pant, it's basically the exact same process here. I'm putting down the base color, although in this situation I'm not really worrying too much about the shadows. That is because the color is quite light, and black in the shadows of this wouldn't look so good. So in order to do those shadows, I'm spraying a solid primer basically, and then putting a solid color over the top of that, and then putting a shadow of Seraphim Sepia into the shadowed areas. It's basically just a slightly darker brown. After I'd done that, I added a highlight and I put a matte clear coat over the top of the pant to make them look mattish. Now I'm going to take this ivory kind of color and paint that over the shoes and leave them aside to dry, because we'll get to them later. But for now, let's deal with the grape that we need to paint, which is actually a human. And I always paint my humans in this way. I like to start out from the color that is underneath our skin, which is in fact a pinky reddish mess. If you took the skin off, we would just be a pink red mess. And that's the color I want to start from on my skin tones, so I'll put those down as my base colors for the skins and leave that piece to dry while I work on some other little bits. I put some deck tan over the drawstrings on the pant and then moved on to painting the base. This base is fairly simple, there is not too much to it. It's mostly just dry brushing a load of grey into the whole base pretty much. I want to show you though that using the exact same colors I can get a totally different effect. Notice how I'm putting a little bit more effort onto this back piece by adding a little bit more dry brushing than I did on the actual road section, and that is creating a different color. It's the same, they're the same colors, but the amount of the color that's on top of the gray and the black that's left over, it's ratios pretty much. So the amount of black that's left over changes the perceived color of the color that I didn't put so much gray on. The value of the color between each other and the proportion of the ratios of the... I can't do science. Just more of one color equals this color. More of other color equal another color. Booga booga booga. Moving on, I started painting the base with a dark silver and then realized I needed to do a little bit more detailing on the base. So before I carry on with that, I'm going to actually do the detailing. There is 2 lines on the road, a white one and a yellow one. And in order to do these, I'm going to put a piece of masking tape down to give me a straight-ish line. And then I'm going to use a sponge out of one of the packages that I've received from whatever product I've had. It's just a sponge, literally a sponge. You could take the one from your wife's sink, but she might kick you in the balls, so don't take that advice either, or do it. It depends on how brave you are. But a sponge, dipped into a little bit of deck tan, dabbed over the surface, creates what looks like a painted road surface. After this, I can put a bit of yellow on top of that surface, but that yellow is a little bit too stark, so using Eandon yellow, I can then add some shadows to those sections. And I use Griff Charger Grey to add a shadow to the white section of the line because it needed to have a bit more grit. If you leave it on its own, it's probably not going to look as good. So this is why I did these things. After this, I can now paint that dark silver because I'm at this point cleaning up essentially the mess that any overspray or any extra dabs of random sponge has made. Now I can go in and take some silver, which is not marked on this bottle annoyingly, and paint both the spray cans that are on the base, as well as the little bit of silver trim that is also present amongst the base. Now to wrap up this base, I'm going to take Retributor Armor, which is a gold from Citadel, and I'm going to paint that using the side of my brush over the top of the name that is on it. Now I can move on to painting the rest of the model. And for the shoes, I chose to use this, I think it was Gory Red, which is an air paint, and I'm pretty sure this was a bad choice. I needed a slightly darker red, but definitely not an airbrush paint. Unfortunately, airbrush paints tend to be thinner. They've been thinned down to go through your airbrush by the factory. So, of course, they're not quite where you want them to be for using with a brush. Not always. Sometimes they are good. And I assumed this one would be good, but I made an incorrect assumption. But I'd already started, and I'd be damned if I was going back and starting any of that again, especially with the time constraints that I have. I just decided to stick with it, which meant a couple more layers than I would like, but a couple of layers does indeed sort out that sort of, it's not so even, the painting, because some parts are darker than others basically. But there is going to be some of that visible, and I'm going to show you how I deal with that a little bit later. That's because you might have that on your model if you're painting something. It doesn't have to be this exact one, but it might be a model that you make and you find that it's a little bit uneven. And so I have a little trick for this after, of course, I've painted all the little black stuff, like the extra little detailing on the sole and the writing that's on the side of the shoe as well. I'm then going to take Griff Charger Grey, the magic secret Griff Charger Grey, and spray this randomly, mostly at the bottom of the shoe, but by spraying this even onto the red and the white and all over the place, it adds a little bit of atmosphere, adds a little bit of dirt, makes it look a little bit more realistic, and equally it just hides any of that unevenness. Now I'm taking the same color, Griff Charger Grey, and a very small brush, and I'm kind of tracing a couple of the lines on the shoes. This is going to separate those lines and create separation between the colors, and it's going to help to make it look like those little parts are slightly more above each other. I don't really know how else to explain it, but it separates the two surfaces from each other. Now I'm going to take this metallic red, which also doesn't have the name on it, kind of like the silver, and I'm going to paint the lid that is on the base. Equally, I'm going to use the same color to paint the lid of the spray can that is right next to it as well, and I will paint the cap of that spray can the same color too. This video was sponsored by CA3D Studios. They create 3D models over on Patreon. This is not the only place you can get their models, but I digress. They make 3D models for you to 3D print and paint. They offer them in two sizes, 1 6 scale and 1 9 scale. They also give them to you in pre-supports, well, with pre-supports, so that you can print them if you don't know how to do any supporting. But a very important thing that is of absolute note for this Patreon, at the VIP tier, which is literally only $20 a month, if you stay subscribed to them for 5 months in a row, you would end up having the equivalent of the entire back catalog of CA3D Studios. There is so many models there, you would literally could paint every day of the rest of your life and still have models to paint by the time you're old and frail. It's one of the best Patreons available. If you're interested in this model from this video, then go check them out. There's a link in the description, and I'll try to put a little card on the screen. Click on that card, but make sure to come back to the video. And thank you CA3D Studios for sponsoring yet another video. I have some water slide decal paper for my printer, which is a normal desktop printer, and I printed off some labels for the spray cans. Obviously, I used some decal set to help soften up the decals so that they stick. If you don't believe in decal set, I think this next shot is going to make you a believer. Do you see the shape of this can? This is not a simple thing to put a decal on, particularly homemade ones, but you can literally see how it just morphs its way around there. Now I'm going to take a cotton earbud, and just roll that over the surface to press out any of the liquid underneath it, and it will just automatically conform to the surface. I mean, this is obviously within reason, but in this reason, it worked perfectly fine. Now moving on, I can start painting the skin tones, and of course we set that up earlier by putting a lovely pinkle layer. Now it's time to add the skin tone, and I have run out of the brown rose that I used to use, and I need to order some, but in its place I'm going to use German orange. It doesn't really, I mean, it matters, but it doesn't matter. It just, I mean, I just feel like I don't really care. Just skin tone colors. Put some colors that are roughly in the color shape of the skin tone, and Bob is in fact going to be your uncle. It's the pinkle that does all the heavy lifting, and equally the orcish dermis layers. But up until those points, we do need to add highlights, and so I just consecutively go up higher with the skin tone color. You can just add a little bit of white to some red, and equally some blue and some yellow to make these colors. That would mean mixing the colors, but I don't think that that is necessary in every single case. But if you don't have access to all these colors, you can totally do it that way. It's just that I have access to this. A lot of people have access to these colors, and that's the colors that I use. I use the orcish dermis to bring back some of that pink, because it does disappear as you're putting these desaturated tones over the top, because essentially making these lighter, you are adding a bit of white to them. You're not physically doing it, but in order to make the color tone lighter in this range of colors, white is what makes it lighter. But white equally desaturates things, which is why I put a yellow, very thin glaze of yellow over the top of all of the skin to bring back some of that saturation, because it turns the pink into an orangey color, and it also puts a little bit of yellow back in the skin. Lately, I have been using a satin varnish as well to finish off the skin tones for me, and I feel like I like the difference between texture of the satin and the matte of the other colors, particularly like, for example, the vest. It will look slightly different to the surface of the skin, and I quite like that juxtaposition. So I've been using a satin varnish over all my skin tones, and after it has dried, I then paint the rest of the details. For this vest, I'm literally just painting down a deck tan over the top of everything. I want this to be white, but not white, if that makes any sense. Then taking the magic Griff Charger Grey, this time I added a little bit of water with it so that it wasn't as harsh, and I only sprayed this in the shadow area, specifically only in the shadow area, and I don't want to get any of this on the skin tone, and so this is why I watered it down, because any overspray wouldn't be so visible if I had watered it down. I then started to assemble some of the model, because now all that I have left to do is the head of this model, and the hair is obviously one of the next steps. So for this, I used a brush for most of this, and I sprayed just the tippy ends of the hair with my airbrush using a color called Buff, which is basically a desaturated yellowy kind of creamy color. I think that's probably the only way I can explain it. And then obviously, whilst that was drying, I put a little bit of attention into the beanie, which was just making the little label a bit darker by just putting another layer of green over it. Then I added a deck tan layer over the little triangle of the delta thing, and then I put red over the top of that. The beanie is essentially done. I also glued this onto her head at this point because I didn't want it wobbling around all over my table, and I sprayed some more of the magic Griff Charger Grey into the sockets of her eyes to create an eyeshadow effect. I used a bit of skeleton horde to put shadow on the hair, and really I probably could have put a highlight with a dry brush on the hair as well, but I figured I didn't need to go as far for this hair. It's not really the important part of the model. The important part is maybe not the hair. I don't know what the important part is, the whole model, but not the hair on its own. So I feel like certain things don't need to have as much attention put into them. Not all the time, and it's not all the time that I won't dry brush the hair, but in this case I just figured it wasn't that necessary. It could add a little bit more detail, but I'm not worried about it. I'm gonna start moving on to painting the eyes. Obviously I painted other things before the eyes, like the little hair bands and all that stuff. For the eyes, I will paint black over the sculpted eyelashes that are on the eyes. This is the part that you need to be very careful. If you use a thin brush, or a small brush basically, you want to thin down your paints enough to make sure that it flows very well, and be careful not to get any on the outside. But luckily, because I've put that varnish on, I could quickly wipe this off if I did make that mistake, but I luckily didn't make any of those mistakes. I used Magos Purple over her lips, and then I painted a little bit of Gilliman flesh into the cut on her cheek, and then I moved on to painting the sclera of the eyes. For that, I used highlight skin, but you could use a cream color of sorts. And if you didn't like the fact that the eyes are too white, I like this, by the way, this is how I like to paint, but if you don't like that, you can add a little bit of that Griff Charger Grey into the corners of the eyes, or you could even put a little bit of the Magos Purple as well, whatever suits your boot. That's not a saying. Doesn't matter though. I painted the eyes themselves using a dark blue at first to shape the eye, and then I used a nice icy blue in the center of that, leaving a thin little line around the outside of the dark blue, which I can then put a small little black dot into the center to obviously make the pupils of the eyes. But to make them look nice and wet, I have a little trick, which is not really my trick. It's in fact just a known thing, that adding a specular highlight onto things makes them look like they are very glossy and shiny. So I put a large one on the one side and a very small one on the other. The large one cuts into the pupil and the small one only touches the iris section of the eye. I then put a gloss clear coat over both eyes and also over the lips as well. I can then attach the fringe onto her head and then the head onto the model and call this one done.
Took a deal, sign another deal, post up in the hills on the rail, headed for a mill, travel with me still, getting kills, all this pop appeal, got these pop stars try popping in, and they getting pop for real. I ain't trying to build, I was trying to lead a mill, getting to it for.
And so we have now made it to the end of yet another Groundeffected video. And I just want to say that this kind of model is the kind I really like a lot. It's just so different from like a normal superhero or anime character or video game character. It kind of humanizes the thing that we like to enjoy as nerds on the video games and on the TV and all the rest of it in the comic books and stuff. But I really enjoyed this character. I really like painting this kind of thing, and I hope that you enjoyed watching it too. I just really also hope that you find something in this video that helps you with your next model, or perhaps you're going to paint this model and you didn't quite know where you were going to start, and this video helped to give you that start. I want to mention at this point a massive thank you to my Patreons. That is because I have my own Patreon. There is a link for that down in the description as well. That is how you support me to keep making these videos. Of course, keeping the lights on costs money, and I need help to pay for that lights sometimes, because YouTube doesn't pay that much. But aside from that, it is also a place where you get a little bit of behind the scenes stuff. I try to live stream on there when I can. I also do give a load of extra details, like for example, we get custom palettes. So these are palettes from every single video. You get to see the paints in order with a list that you can print and take to the hobby store and find the paints that you need specifically. So if you're interested in that, go check out the description for that. And of course, this is the end of the video. If you didn't like anything you saw in it, well then you should probably f*** off.